Live from Washington, D.C., this is Balance of Power with Joe Mathieu and Kaylee Lines.
There you have it. A nice round of applause for the chair of the Federal Reserve, Jay Powell, speaking live before the Greater Providence Chamber of Commerce, located there in Warwick, Rhode Island, the home of T.F. Green Airport, and covering a lot of ground here. They finally did get to tariffs, and we've seen a lot of headlines on the terminal to that effect, with Jay Powell suggesting that it is a one-time pass-through, that tariffs will drive a one-time change in prices, not unlike the White House has been saying, though still warning about the effects of cutting too early. I'm Joe Mathieu in Washington. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. We're going to bring you to World Headquarters in New York to talk with Bloomberg's Michael McKee, who is also watching and listening to Jay Powell. It's a bit newsier than I expected, Mike, coming off the news conference that you were just in about a week ago. The Fed chair speaking at length about the impact of tariffs and what he seems to see as a weakening job market.
Basically, though, Joe, he was reiterating what he had said, that tariffs are going to be a one-time impact on inflation. Now, he did say in his remarks that when he says one time, he doesn't mean 1 month, that they will be spread out because of the nature of the tariffs that the president is putting on. But it will be a sort of one time in each sector, and then we're through it sometime next year, and inflation should start coming down again. It's a gamble, of course, that inflation doesn't start rocketing up and that they don't get the inflation expectations of the American people out of line. But the idea that the labor market is in some trouble is a little shaky, was the justification for the rate cut last week. Right. So there wasn't a lot new there. If we were looking for something new, what I would say is there was a little bit of politics in there. In the beginning of his speech, he talked about how the Fed had to take extraordinary measures because of COVID and because of the great financial crisis to keep the economy from exploding. And he came back and said, we're under a lot of political pressure now for doing what we had to do to keep the economy going, and that we need to stick to what we do, sort of brush back to those who have criticized the Fed for going too far. And at the very end, you notice he was asked about whether they are political, and he gave kind of the standard answer about, no, we just do what's best for the country. Then he added that people who are calling us political, it's just a cheap shot.
Pass through less than expected when it comes to tariffs. Kind of interesting to hear him mention that. Mike, is that because companies are eating it, or countries, exporters are eating it?
He said basically companies are eating it. That of the three three people who could have to pay most of it, that it doesn't look like exporters are taking on any, if all, much, if any, of the cost, and that the
Isn't
companies
that bad
who are
news for
importing,
shareholders?
It is,
for investors listening to us,
because margins compress, and so the feeling is at some point they're going to have to start passing it along, and they haven't really done that yet. But that's what the Fed is keeping an eye on: is when does that start to happen?
Fascinating. A lot of Fed speak right now, Michael. This is the environment that we're in. Is Wall Street listening? Because you wouldn't tell by looking.
Well, it would depend on who you were talking about. They were listening on Monday when Stephen Myron spoke, and they didn't find anything compelling in what he had to say. And they're listening to Jay Powell today, of course, because he's Jay Powell. He didn't really add anything new. So you're not getting a reaction in the trading markets because of this. But it does kind of put them on the record, and I think that's what everybody else on the Fed is rushing to do, is sort of get on the record about this. We have so many speeches this week, probably a world's record for Fed speeches in 1 week, that we aren't going to probably leave the week with any additional views on how things are going to happen, but at least we'll know what each individual thinks.
All right, Michael, keeping us honest as always from World Headquarters in New York with his view on the Fed. Michael McKee, Bloomberg International Economics and Policy Correspondent. Let's see how the markets are faring right now. Charlie Pellet has that for us as well from New York. Charlie, how are we looking?
Right now, lows of the day, recapping, resetting. You heard the remarks on Bloomberg. Fed Chair Jay Powell offering no hints on whether he might support a rate cut at the central bank's October meeting. Action fairly muted, somewhat muted, as Powell said the outlooks for the labor market and inflation face risks. Here's where we stand again. Low of the day with the S&P now down 28, drop there of 0.4%. Dow Industrials lower by 56. That is a drop of 0.1%. Nasdaq down 0.6%. The only green right now, Russell 2000 index of small cap shares. It is advancing by 0.3%. The 10-year on this J. Powell Tuesday, 4.12%. The 2-year, 3.59%. Spot gold trading at a record up 1%, 37.83 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude up 1.6%, 63.30 per barrel of WTI. Kenvue shares, they are higher right now by 3.3%, making up some of yesterday's 7.5% drop as President Trump's call for pregnant women to avoid Tylenol drew sharp criticism from researchers who say the advice ignores decades of evidence and could endanger mothers and babies. Again, Kenvue up now by 3.2%. Again, stocks lower, S&P down 0.4%. Balance of power continues right now, and back we go to Washington. Once again, your host, here he is, Joe Mathieu.
All right, Charlie. Great to have Charlie Pellet along for the ride every day here on Balance of Power. We're live in Washington on Bloomberg TV and radio, live as well on YouTube and Bloomberg Originals and satellite radio channel 121. Thank you for being part of our conversation today. As we try to unpack the words of President Trump, that's how we started the broadcast a bit earlier today with President Trump at the United Nations. We're going to assemble our panel next to get their take on a speech that many, I guess, saw coming. It is President Trump, after all, but a thumbing of the nose, for lack of a better phrase, at the globalists he referred to in the room. Here's a taste of the president earlier today in New York.
We have reasserted that America belongs to the American people, and I encourage all countries to take their own stand in defense of their citizens as well. You have to do that because I see it. I'm not mentioning names. I see it, and I can call every single one of them out. You're destroying your countries. They're being destroyed. It's time to end the failed experiment of open borders. You have to end it now. Let's see. I can tell you, I'm really good at this stuff. Your countries are going to hell.
Going to hell was the message for those in the room. More than 100 world leaders gathered in New York. And we play it to the panel now. Bloomberg Politics contributors Jeanne, Zaino, and Rick Davis are with us. Rick is our Republican strategist and partner at Stonecourt Capital. Jeanne is our Democratic analyst and democracy visiting fellow at Harvard Kennedy School's Ash Center. Rick, what was that? Did the president plan to give the room a middle finger today?
Well, for sure, right? I mean, he actually pretty much read the speech that he planned to give, even though there was some veering off script from time to time. And it was clearly a doctrinal speech about America first. The themes he struck on immigration and security and climate all come right out of the America First playbook. And I would say, if you believe in American exceptionalism, if you believe in the fact that America is the greatest country for good in the world, and that much of the prosperity and safety that we've experienced since World War II has been because of our leadership around the world, you would have been aghast by the speech today. Big step backwards with the people who believe in that kind of concept for America.
Yeah, we're going to be, by the way, speaking in just a couple of moments with the president of Latvia, and we'll be curious to get his reaction. He's at the UN right now. Jeanne, the president spoke directly to the organization itself, not only the members who were in the room, asking what is the purpose of the United Nations? All they seem to do is write a really strongly worded letter. Is there some truth to that?
Yeah, it's the 80th anniversary of the UN. I would have liked to hear what the plan for the U.S. is in terms of seeing the UN into the future. The president is right. Reforms are necessary. But unfortunately, he spent, Joe, 5 minutes talking about how aggrieved he was that over the last 20 years, the UN has failed to take him up on his offer to redecorate and renovate the UN. I mean, for those of us who watch Trump on a daily basis, none of this was new. But once you got past the teleprompter, the escalator, and the renovations of the UN, what we're left with is a world that 7-8 months into his administration is less safe. And the United States' place in it is less safe than we were when he started. And that's why what was stunning is not only nothing on the 80th anniversary, But what about China? He barely mentioned our major competitor in China, almost nothing on Russia, but a lot of vitriolic language on our closest allies who he says are going to hell.
Talked about climate change at length, Rick, calling it the greatest con job ever perpetrated on the world. He said that the Biden administration had lost more than 300,000 children to human trafficking, and that many countries were on the brink of destruction due to their reliance on green energy. You mentioned a couple of years ago this speech would have played very differently. For those in the room, does he not need to back up any of those statements?
Well, he won't. I mean, I think we have enough of a track record with Donald Trump to know that he's going to let the fur fly, right? And it doesn't have to be accurate. He's making a point. He would even say, I'm just, hyperbole is my friend. Sometimes I exaggerate. But, look, I mean, this was a speech full of factual inconsistencies. The case on climate today was exceptionally strong from his point of view. I mean, it took up a lot more of the time at the UN speech than it would have, I thought, been granted by him. But full of inconsistencies. He loves to rail about China, not having any wind power. Why would we have any? And of course, they're the leader in the world on wind power. So, I mean, unless you put a filter on this, you would look at the world much differently by the kind he described.
As the president now heads for his meeting with Muslim leaders and a reception of world leaders this evening before heading back to Washington, D.C., it's a great pleasure to be joined by the president of Latvia. President Edgars Rinkēvičs is with us live from the United Nations in New York on this important day. And Mr. President, we welcome you to Bloomberg TV and radio. The president, in a news conference just a moment ago, as you were sitting down to talk with us on Bloomberg, said that NATO countries should shoot down aircraft entering their airspace, of course, referring to the Russian incursions on Polish airspace as well as Estonian airspace. Is your country prepared if that happens?
Well, actually, Latvia, as well as other Baltic states, are under the NATO air patrolling mission. So that kind of decision should be taken by NATO command. But I think that President Trump and other leaders who have expressed their views on this issue are right. If Russian aircrafts keep flying, keep violating our airspace, NATO's airspace, then the only way how to stop them is to show force. And from that perspective, I would say that we are going to push for more stringent NATO policy in this regard.
Interesting. I'd love if you have more details on those changes and the potential for increasing air defenses along the Russian border. Is there a way to deter Russia from flying these missions?
Yes, there is. Actually, we have two issues here. Number one, it's drones that have been flying into the Polish, Romanian, also Latvian territory. Mostly we have seen those kind of incursions as tests. And here more anti-drone defense is needed. Actually, that's a bit also the kind of race when it comes to technologies. Number two, it's what happened with Estonia. MiGs flying into the Estonian territory, and here, as I said, to some extent the Baltic states are in a very peculiar position because we do not have our fighters. Since we joined NATO back in 2004, there is so-called Baltic air policing mission. What has been decided that policing mission will become a full-fledged air defense mission. And then I think that rules of engagement need also to be upgraded in a way that if Russians continue, then yes, indeed, the opening of fire would be an alternative. Can we stop Russians? Yes, we have seen what happened with the Baltic Sea. A couple of months ago, we had many incidents with underwater infrastructure. When so-called Baltic Sentry mission started, more ships, NATO ships patrolling the Baltic Sea, all of a sudden the pattern changed. The problem with Russians is that they are going to stop incursions in the Baltic or in the NATO airspace if they see show of force. But at the same time, they are going to find other ways how actually to test and to challenge the alliance.
So are you essentially, President Rinkēvičs, describing a no-fly zone for Eastern Europe, for border nations that NATO would work together on? Is that how you defend the skies?
Not exactly no-fly zone. No-fly zone would mean that actually we stop flying all aircraft, civilian, friendly NATO aircraft.
Understood.
I'm advocating for much stringent defense policy of the alliance, as we just discussed.
I want to ask you about the idea of a drone wall. Baltic countries are apparently having this conversation, a system that would take down any drones that cross the border. Are you involved in those discussions? Could that be made reality?
Yes, indeed, we are talking about that. Indeed, we are learning a lot from Ukrainian experience, but of course we also see that development of technology at this time is so quick that actually it's quite challenging to find the right approach. But indeed, the Baltic nations or eastern flank nations are discussing also the drone wall, as well as actually counter mobility measures against any possible Russian incursion if that may happen.
I'm sure you heard the president's speech earlier, President Trump's speech before the United Nations. Mr. President, he spoke about the potential for secondary sanctions against Russia, but said he would only put them in place if European nations stopped buying Russian oil. What is your reaction to that?
I'm absolutely supporting that proposal by President Trump. Actually, Latvia, along other countries that are bordering Russia, have been advocating for stopping buying Russian oil and gas since 2022. We actually made that decision when Russians started their full-scale aggression back in February 2022. So from that point of view, I do believe that President Trump is right. I do believe that all European nations must stop buying Russian oil and gas, and they must stop financing Russian war machines. So from that point of view, there is a point in what President Trump said in his address to the United Nations General Assembly.
Well, what are you hearing, President, from your NATO allies who are in fact purchasing Russian oil? Will they make that commitment?
Well, I think that if there is a clear position from the United States, if other EU nations or NATO European allies do stop buying Russian oil and gas, and there is no alternative. It's US LNG, by the way. Latvia is buying currently around 75% of the United States liquefied natural gas. Then I think that those countries may change their mind, and I think that the position of the United States in this matter is very relevant. So I do hope that all capitals in Europe are hearing the statement from the United States at this point.
Well, there's a story coming out of the Pentagon here in Washington. The Department of Defense is pulling back on funding for programs on NATO's eastern flank, including the Baltic Security Initiative, which would impact your country. Are you hearing directly from the Pentagon on this? And can countries like yours make up the difference?
Well, we are in discussions with our colleagues in the United States Department of War. And at this point, I would say that we are very grateful to the United States for all the assistance the country has provided to Latvia since re-establishment of our independence. But we are also working with the Congress, and I do hope that we are going to find the solution where we are going to continue this cooperation. Let me say that actually, when it comes to the U.S. aid in this regard, then we are mostly buying the U.S. equipment, and also we are then financing that purchase also not only from U.S. funds, but also Latvian or the Baltic funds. So this is where we are in the process, so I can't confirm that the kind of final decision has been made. And I do understand the push from the United States when it comes to more financing, but let me remind the viewers of Bloomberg also that countries like Latvia currently spend almost 5% on defense of GDP, because we understand what capabilities we need, and I do hope that also this message is going to be heard in U.S. government as well.
Spoken like the president of a frontline nation, sharing a border with Russia, certainly. I'm curious, Mr. President, what your thought was on the message today from President Trump. He spoke to the room. He said your countries are going to hell. Was that the message that you needed to hear today?
I think that the United Nations is a great place where different opinions, different views are being expressed. And I think that sometimes, frankly, I'm attending those UNGA meetings in different capacities as the foreign minister before I became president since 2009. And sometimes you will probably need to get kind of very strong language to wake up. But definitely I hope that we are going to find common language with everyone in the room when it comes to the critical issues of the global development, be it climate change or be it other issues. However, I think also that one thing that is currently an issue here with the United States is that this organization needs reform, be it UN Security Council. We see that when it comes to the war in Ukraine, or it used to be Syria a couple of years ago, this organization was not capable to deal with challenges that actually it was created for.
That's a very diplomatic answer, Mr. President. President Trump referred to many countries on the brink of destruction. Well, that's true. Due to their use of green energy. Does he have the wrong or the right idea there?
I think that this discussion about climate change and what should we do is now developing. And, you know, from time to time we get into extremes. Sometimes we get into extreme that we are all going to die immediately, and then we do some policies that, in hindsight, seem to be not so clever, and then we probably change the tone. In my own country, we have now that debate as well. What should we do, and are we exaggerating? So from that point of view, I think that the climate change is real. The issue is how you deal with that, whether those policies we are agreeing are the right ones, whether windmills are the right answer. Back home, we have the same debate. I would actually be happy to continue that discussion, and probably in this kind of clash of opinions, we can probably find the right policy as well.
Yeah, interesting. Before you leave us, Mr. President, and get back to your meetings at the UN, I want to get back to where we started, and that is the looming threat from Russia, and specifically from Vladimir Putin. What is the message from your country, from you, to Vladimir Putin as he considers pushing the line, as we've been referring to it, in countries like Latvia? If he decides to fly into your airspace, if he sends drones or aircraft, what would be your warning ahead of that decision?
My warning would be learn from history, because pushing the envelope, crossing the line, at one point means that you are losing everything. And I think that the message that we are hearing from NATO allies, from President Trump, from President Erdogan, from other leaders of the alliance, are very, very clear messages. So don't even try.
President Edgars Rinkēvičs, the president of Latvia, with us live from the United Nations. The General Assembly underway now in New York. Mr. President, thank you for the insights and for spending time with us today on Bloomberg. I'm Joe Mathieu in Washington as we digest some of the remarks we just heard from the Latvian president. We want to update the markets. We'll talk with our panel on the other side. Charlie Pellet is watching stocks and bonds in New York at World Headquarters. Charlie, how are we doing?
All right, now lows of the day. We have got the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ. They are all retreating. Joe Mathieu, tech stocks especially are swooning right now. Let's get right to the numbers, because we got NASDAQ down 213 points now, down 0.9%. Traders driving stocks from records. Fed Chair Jay Powell offering no hints on whether he might support a rate cut at the Central central bank's October meeting. Russell 2000 index of small cap shares, last update told you it was higher. Right now down 0.2%, keeping it all in context. S&P 500 index trading lower by 40, down 0.6%. The Dow now down 129, drop there of 0.3. Nasdaq down 0.9%, but again, Russell 2000 index giving up earlier gains, down now by 0.2%. Our Mag 7 index being hit especially hard, down 1.4%. Again, the S&P down 0.6%. 10-year 4.11%, the 2-year 3.58%. Gold up 0.9%, 37.80 the ounce, and West Texas Intermediate crude up 1.6%, 63.27 a barrel. Again, recapping, stocks now lower, S&P down 0.6%. Balance of power continues now. Back we go to Washington. Once again, your host is Joe Mathieu.
All right, Charlie, many thanks. Live from New York, Charlie Pellet on the markets, and he'll be back coming up at the top of the hour with more where that came from, 2 p.m. Eastern time here on Bloomberg TV and radio. The delegation from Iran that is on the ground in New York to attend the United Nations General Assembly that we've been talking about today will not be able to enjoy the $1.50 hot dog at Costco. Indeed, guidance restrictions from the administration have gone out here. The State Department requiring Iranians traveling to the UN's big event here to obtain the government's permission before they shop at wholesale club stores like Costco or Walmart, Sam's Club. This is real. If they want to purchase luxury goods, according to a document on the Federal Register website, we will not allow the Iranian regime to allow its clerical elites to have a shopping spree in New York, while the Iranian people endure poverty, crumbling infrastructure, and dire shortages of water and electricity, according to a State Department spokesman. This is normal. They're typically held to a radius around Columbus Circle. But apparently Costco in any neighborhood will be off limits. They have the small Costcos, James, I guess, in Manhattan. I didn't think that was a thing in New York. We bring Jeanne Zaino back into the conversation, Bloomberg Politics contributor, our Democratic analyst, following our conversation with the Latvian president. Jeanne, a lot of folks who were in that room, you just heard a very diplomatic conversation, are still recovering from some of the language that they heard from President Trump. Your countries are going to hell, the message today from the president, as we touched on briefly with yourself and Rick Davis earlier. What did you make of the reaction from the president of Latvia?
By the way, Joe, I am a proud member of Costco and BJ's.
Good
so
job.
We have some of those, although not directly in the city, to your point. I just didn't realize that that was a #1 shopping destination for Iranian diplomats visiting. So this is all new to me.
No.
I thought it was a really interesting conversation with the president, certainly diplomatic. I loved when he said that's what he gets paid for, and it's true. And I also, as an aside, like that he too uses the word UNGA, because that's always a debate this week. Is it UNGA? What, you know? But I think #1, what was so important was that he said very explicitly that he does support the president when the president says that NATO members have got to stop buying oil, that this is critical. And of course, he said his country has cut back since the incursion by Russia. I think what I didn't hear from him is what kind of pressure can Donald Trump put on those NATO members that are spending the most? Because, of course, those are some of Donald Trump's closest alliances in NATO, including Viktor Orban in Hungary, Slovakia, Turkey. So I also, and certainly the president didn't say this, but was stunned to hear President Trump say during his speech that he only learned about these purchases 2 weeks ago. I'm assuming that that is not the case, but if it is, that is stunning to me because, of course, it's long been discussed.
I'm glad that you mentioned that. I couldn't believe that statement because it's something that we've been talking about since the beginning of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Not only did he say he just heard about it, he said that the European leaders couldn't believe that he found out. Jeanne, by the way, remarkable to hear the Latvian president, the first time I've heard another world leader refer to the Department of War here in the United States. I just mention it for what it's worth because I was surprised when he said it. The president of the United States, that is, got into what was happening in London as well when he was talking about the impact of immigration on Europe, which is what generated the line, your countries are going to hell, that we played for you. he talked about the European continent invaded by a force of illegal aliens like no one has seen before, and suggested that London is moving towards Sharia law. There are people in the room who know that's not true, right?
Certainly, I hope that most, if not all of them, know that is not true. He had some really difficult words for the mayor, who there's no love lost between the two of them. But this is pure Donald Trump. And those of us who have long watched him, I was thinking during his speech, Joe, that if this had been 10 years ago and it was his first or second speech to the UN, I may have been stunned. But I think we have become so used to the way that Donald Trump talks. And this seemed a lot more like a MAGA speech than it did a speech at the UN, the kind that we are used to. And of course, this is what Donald Trump supporters love about him. He will go out and pretty much say anything. But of course, so much of what he says has to be fact checked. Certainly the issue of Sharia law. Rick mentioned before the issue of the wind turbines in China. I mean, the fact that he says he's settled 7 wars. I mean, the list of fact checking that had to go on for that speech is very, very long. And when the camera panned to the faces in the audience, they were pretty much stone-faced. And there was a lot less nervous giggling, I think, than we saw when Donald Trump first came to the UN.
I want to ask you about that. Remember, it was 2018 when he got a round of laughter as he was kind of boasting about his accomplishments. The president stopped and said, wow, I didn't expect that reaction. Everyone was being pretty honest, I think, on both sides of the speaker's rostrum that day. There was no laughing today outside of some of the jokes that he was making about Brazil and a few other things. What did you make of the reaction to the speech? You mentioned the dour looks on world leaders' faces. It was a very different room. We only have about a minute left, Jeanne. Speak to it.
Yeah, very different room. And the only applause I heard, and correct me if I'm wrong, Joe, was when he said release all the hostages, because obviously so many people in that room and elsewhere agree with that. But I think world leaders, like so many of us in the United States, are more used to Trump. They have figured out a way to deal with him. And I think they were prepared for this.
Absolutely. We're going to have a lot more on this, of course, meeting of the United Nations General Assembly in our late edition. Jeanne, thank you so much. Jeanne Zaino, Bloomberg Politics contributor and democracy visiting fellow at Harvard Kennedy School's Ash Center. Thanks as well to Rick Davis from Stonecourt Capital. I'm Joe Mathieu in Washington. This is Bloomberg.